We'll flip on the news today, and oh boy, we face daunting challenges. From soaring inflation to international conflicts, from women's sports to the border crisis, families struggle to endure a housing shortage and a violent crime surge. Each night, we kneel before the Almighty, asking His guidance. And I wonder, what's gone wrong, and how can we fix it? What mortal might be qualified to answer? Well, maybe someone with a superb education who earned a scholarship to Yale and graduated from America's top med school. Perhaps a member of the cabinet who invested years studying dire urban problems. If you feel the same, then you're in luck. Tonight's guest is a scholar of world renown. Even CNN acknowledges him as one of our foremost physicians and scientists. The Library of Congress named him one of 89 living legends. In 2008, he received America's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was even portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr. in the film Gifted Hands. Yet, despite these lofty accolades, Dr. Carson remains down to earth. A loving husband, our speaker will soon celebrate 50 years of marriage to his amazing wife, Candy. I'm convinced Ben's fundamental goodness is the reason his children's book, Why America Matters, became a bestseller. I'm so glad that he's here with us today. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Ben Carson.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you. And thank you for being patriots and doing what you can to help move our country in the right direction. I'm thoroughly convinced that we are going to get our country back. But it's going to take a struggle. It's going to require courage. And it's going to require us to recognize that we cannot be the land of the free if we're not the home of the brave. And have you ever noticed that America is the only country with a dream? There's an American dream. There's no Portuguese dream. There's no Russian dream. There's no Canadian dream. Canadians thought they had one until recently, but we're the only ones who have a dream. And people have hope and they aspire to come to America from all over the place. And that's even with all the people who are trying to denigrate our country and saying what a horrible place it is, that it's systemically racist, it's unfair to people, all these things. If it was all that bad, why are all these people trying to get in here? Think about it. And when they got here, why wouldn't they call all their friends and relatives and say, don't come here, it's a horrible place? We're not seeing that. So that tells you something pretty special about our country and why it's so important that we fight to preserve it. You know, our founders were some incredible people. And there are those who try to denigrate our founders, say that they were not good men because some of them had slaves. You have to be pretty asinine to believe that because, you know, if you know anything about history, you know virtually every country and every civilization has had to deal with slavery. So that did not make us unique because we had slavery. What made us unique is the fact that we had so many people who were vehemently opposed to it that we fought a bloody civil war and lost a large portion of our population to get rid of it. And that's what we need to teach our children. And we need to learn from mistakes and be able to move forward. And that's really the key. But, you know, my American dream was to be a doctor. I just loved medicine. For some reason, from the time I was a little kid, anything that came on the radio about medicine, I was right there like a magnet. On television, Dr. Kildare, Dr. Casey, man, I was all over that stuff. I even liked going to the doctor's office. I would gladly have a shot just so I could smell the alcohol swabs. I was anything that had to do with medicine, maybe not a COVID shot, but other things I was very happy to get. And there was only one big problem. And to become a doctor, you have to go to medical school. And to go to medical school, you have to have good grades. You have to be smart. And I was a terrible student. I was probably the worst student you've ever seen. I remember once we were having an argument in the schoolyard about who was the dumbest kid in the school. And it wasn't a big argument. They all agreed it was me. But then someone tried to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. And I said, there are billions of people in the world. They said, yep, and you're the dumbest one. And unfortunately, that day after recess, we had a math quiz. And I didn't get along well with math because I had a philosophical disagreement with the math teacher who thought that it was important to know your timetables. And, as far as I was concerned, they were printed on the back of the notebook, so you could just look it up anytime you needed it. So needless to say, I didn't do so well on that quiz. And in those days, you had to pass your paper to the person behind you. They would correct it, give it back to you. The teacher would call your name out loud, and you had to report your score out loud. Not a problem if you got 100 or a 90, but a big problem if, like me, you got a 0 and just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. Because I knew they were just going to laugh like crazy when I said 0. So I started scheming. I said, I know what I'll do. I'll mumble. The teacher said, think I said one thing, and the girl behind me will think I said something else. So when she called my name, I said, 9. And she said, 9. Benjamin, you got 9, right? Oh, this is wonderful. I knew you could do it. And she just ranted and raved for about 5 minutes. And finally, the girl behind me couldn't take it any longer. And she stood up and said, he said none. And the kids were just rolling in the aisles. And if I could have disappeared into thin air, never to be heard from again in the history of the world, I would gladly have done so. But I couldn't. So I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me a lot. Not enough to make me study, but it bothered me a lot. And, my poor mother, she was just terrible. She was horrified that I was doing so poorly. My brother was doing poorly. She didn't know what to do. But she prayed. She had faith in God. She prayed for wisdom, and God gave it to her. My brother and I didn't think it was that wise because it was to turn off the TV and make us read books. And I hated that idea at first. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading those books because we were desperately poor. But between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere. I could do anything. I could be anywhere. I couldn't wait to get into my books. I was always reading. And in the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to laugh and call me names, who were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I would say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was probably a little obnoxious. But boy, it just made such a big difference. But, I was able to go on and accomplish my American dream of becoming a doctor. But also, in the process, realizing what an amazing country we have. And I remember when I came to the point of finally retiring, I was looking forward to retirement because I had an extraordinarily busy career. But I obviously failed retirement and ended up in the political arena. If somebody had said to me, you're going to end up in politics, I would have told them they were crazy. But after I gave the prayer breakfast speech in 2013, everybody was saying, you should run for president. I was saying, these people are crazy. I said, if I just ignore them, it'll go away. But it didn't go away. Everywhere I went, there were people with run, been run signs. I had over 500,000 petitions in my office. I finally said to the Lord, if you really want me to run for president, you got to give me all the stuff that I need, like an organization, a Rolodex with all the important names, a lot of money. The next thing I knew, we had all those things. Our organization was raising more money per month than the RNC. It was amazing. And, but, the thing that really impressed me as I traveled around the country when I was running was the fact that the vast majority of people in this country, from the smallest little hamlets in North Dakota and to the largest cities, most of the people had common sense. What they lacked is courage. We have a lot of people who think the right way, but they would rather stand in the corner staring at the floor than speak up and potentially get canceled. And what we have to recognize is that we cannot be the land of the free if we're not the home of the brave. People have got to stand up, and it's so critical at this time because of what's happening to our country. And, that's why we started the American Cornerstone Institute. Myself and some outstanding people from HUD wanted to continue with the progress we were making and help people to understand who we are as a nation. What were those fundamental pillars that made us great? We didn't go from a ragtag bunch of militiamen to the pinnacle of the world in record time by accident. It was because of our faith which taught us how to treat each other, love your neighbor, not cancel your neighbor if they don't think the same way you do, if they have a different yard sign. That was a big factor. And then there was the cornerstone of liberty. We believed in freedom for individuals, not mandates, but freedom to live the life that you want to live as long as it wasn't interfering with somebody else. And then the concept of community. You had all these little communities all over the country, 50, 100 families, nobody else around for 50 miles. In many cases, they didn't even speak the same language. They came from different countries. Why were they successful? Because they understood the concept of the common good. If it was harvest time and Mr. Jones was picking apples and fell out of the tree and broke his leg, everybody harvested his crops, no questions asked. Didn't need to know about his political affiliation or his religious affiliation. They just knew that it was their neighbor and they were in trouble. And that was one of the things that characterized the rapid rise of this country and the ability to coalesce and to grow and to work together, the United States of America. And then there's the pillar of life, caring about life from the womb to the tomb, caring about all of our citizens and treating people fairly, justly. What a difference that made. And we also created the Little Patriots program, looking at our children, recognizing that they're being indoctrinated. And think about this. You've got little children whose brains are still developing. The brain starts developing immediately after conception and putting down millions of neurons every day. That's still continuing at the time of birth. That's why little babies sleep so long, because they have so many neurons developing still. And that brain continues to develop into the 20s. That's when you reach brain maturation in your 20s. And yet here we are expecting children in grade school to make life-changing decisions about who they are. Their brain isn't fully developed. You have people taking advantage of their curiosity and the fact that they're easily persuaded. And don't you know that that's the reason that God gave children parents? To protect them from those people who would take advantage of their immaturity. And, we have so many issues going on in the country right now. Our energy policies, we've been blessed with abundant fossil fuels, and we've learned how to extract them, cleanest air and the cleanest water since it's been measured. And yet we have people who say, no, it has to be green energy, only green renewable energy. And if people were smart, they would say, use what you have to get what you want. Don't create an incredible difficulty, particularly for poor people, by doing things that raise the cost of energy so high that, they're worried about how they're going to get to the store. This doesn't make any sense, not to mention the ramifications of it, like strengthening people like Putin because of our energy policies gives him a lot more leverage. And, we have the ability to utilize our liquid natural gas and export it and bring in enormous amounts of money and start fighting our national debt to try to improve the future for our children. These are the kinds of things we need to be doing. And of course, that has a major impact on inflation and the cost of everything, which again is hurting the poor people in our country. And then we have an administration that absolutely is dishonest about what's happening at our southern border. And people are just flooding in here from every place. We have no idea who these people are. And, if we don't have a bunch of terrorists coming through, they're planning something really big in this country. They are guilty of terrorist malpractice. I mean, we roll out the red carpet for them. And of course they're going to come and they're going to do stuff. And of course, after the carnage occurs, they'll be saying it's Trump's fault, or some other Republicans, the MAGAs, they're responsible for this. It's really unconscionable what's going on. And then look at the crime that's running rampant in our cities. People just coming into stores and taking stuff, the carjackings, just every aspect of crime going forward. Why wouldn't it if people aren't being held responsible for their actions? If we don't have law and order, of course we're going to have that. And what's going on in our educational institutions? What's creating the kind of hatred that we see for Israel right now? Obviously, there's a lot of propaganda, a lot of manipulation and indoctrination that's going on. And, this transgenderism that's going on. The poor kids, it would be just a major nightmare to wake up and to be a kid and have to go through all that stuff. But that's why they need responsible adults in their lives who recognize what's going on and try to do something about it. And a lot of people think all of this stuff that's going on in our society right now is of recent origin. It really isn't. If you look at the congressional record, January the 10th, 1963, more than 60 years ago, you'll read the 45 goals of communism in this country. And it's all the stuff that's going on right now. Gaining control of the media so you could spoon feed the people what you wanted them to hear and shield them from what you didn't want them to hear. Gain control of the educational institutions so you could indoctrinate the kids, drive wedges between parents and their children. Sexual immorality, make it seem normal and natural. I mean, the list goes on and on. All the things that are happening, it's been planned for a long time. That's the reason that Khrushchev told Eisenhower that your grandchildren's children will live under our system, because they were planning this. And the American people have got to wake up. They have to recognize that we are being played. We are being manipulated into another system, and it is not anywhere near as good as the system that we have. Every place where socialism has sprung up has failed. And I just think of a place like Venezuela, which I've visited a number of times. It used to be a very pleasant place, beautiful hotels and resorts and museums and shopping centers. The biggest thing that people argued about is whether or not they were the most beautiful people in the world. That was the big topic. And look what's happened to them almost overnight. And we've got the same kinds of precursors going on in our country right now. I was talking to a man today who grew up in Poland while it was communist. And he was telling about the censorship. He told us about when he was in the 5th grade. And he questioned why there was so much emphasis on learning the Russian language when they weren't even proficient in the Polish language. And for that, he was sent to the principal's office. The police were called. They went and visited his parents and told them that if he continued with such nonsense, he would be taken away from them. That's the kind of place that it was. And that's what we see with these Marxist governments who feel that they are in charge of the children and that the parents are just local guardians. I mean, it goes on, and he talked about all the things that are happening in America today that remind him so much of what was going on in communist Poland. We have to wake up and recognize what's happening in our country and that we have the responsibility to do something about it. And particularly with our history, there are people trying to distort our history, trying to get rid of our monuments, all these things. Recognize that your history provides your identity, and your identity is the basis of your beliefs. So if you can break that chain anywhere, then you've got people blowing like leaves in the wind who are very easy to manipulate. And there's always a dumbing down of a society before it becomes socialist or communist. And have you noticed that our society is being dumbed down? You know, if you look at those man on the street interviews, they ask them the simplest questions. You know, who won the Civil War? They're like, Portugal. I mean, they have no idea. And if people are that ignorant, they are very easily led. They are very easily manipulated. And, you know, you think back to 1831 when Alexis de Tocqueville came to this country to study it because Europeans were fascinated with America. How could this fledgling nation, barely 50 years old, already be competing with them on virtually every level? And de Tocqueville was going to flush it out. And he looked at our government and he was duly impressed with our separation of powers and with the way that things actually work. And then he looked at our business environment. He was very impressed with how it encouraged entrepreneurship and innovation. And then he looked at our school system and he was blown away. He could find a mountain man in the middle of the forest and the guy could read. And the guy could tell him about the Declaration of Independence. But if you really want to be blown away, look up a sixth grade exit exam from 150 years ago. See what you had to know to graduate from the sixth grade. I doubt that many adults today could pass that test. And that is hurting us tremendously as a nation. And we must get back to the fundamentals of teaching our children how to function, not only in our society, but how to advance our society. And then the last thing that the Tocqueville looked at were our churches. And that's what impressed him the most. The sermons that came from those pulpits that were so inspiring that they inspired a ragtag bunch of militiamen to defeat the most powerful military force on the earth. And that gave the citizens of our country a moral compass of what was right and what was wrong. Not what your truth is and what my truth is, but what the truth is. And he concluded his series, his analysis, by saying, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. And that's what we have to think about, particularly moving into the election season and elections next year. We have to realize that we may be the last barrier between socialism in this country. We have to take it very seriously. We have to recognize that we all have spheres of influence and we must use them appropriately. And we have to stop being so divisive among ourselves. You know, whoever wins the primaries, we all have to get behind them. We can't say, well, my candidate didn't win. I don't think I'm going to vote. You know, that's voting for the other side. And if they get in again and they have further chances to perpetuate the ideology of socialism, we will not come back. We will not return from that. And I was in Europe in October and talking to a bunch of the Europeans. And they were flabbergasted about what's going on in our country. They think we've lost our minds. But they were also very worried because they say, if the United States goes down, what happens to them? And we have to realize that we have a very important place in the world. And we're going to have to understand how to prioritize, how to recognize what the big picture is. No more of this little my pet peeve stuff. I don't like this person's personality. Well, tell me, would you rather have a leader who perhaps has a loose tongue but has very good policies, or someone who has a silver tongue who destroys your society? You know, we gotta start using that brain of ours. And we on the Republican side are very fortunate because we have a deep bench. We have several people who we will be able to count on in the future as excellent leaders. And I don't see that so much on the other side. So we need to cultivate those leaders. We need to be cordial to each other. We have to remember what Ronald Reagan used to say, the 11th commandment, don't speak ill of your fellow Republican. We shouldn't be trying to tear each other down. That's just playing into the hands of the opposition. And then we also need to recognize that if we allow the leftists to weaponize the Department of Justice, to eliminate their competitor, then this will not be America anymore. We need to understand those things, and we need to act on those things. And we cannot accept last-minute manipulations in the voting process. And we can't listen to people who say, you can monitor the voting, but you have to do it from the other side of the room where you can't see anything. Or people who come up who aren't even authorized to do so, who say the signatures don't have to match. And a whole host of things. We don't have to accept that. We must insist on integrity. And it's not only for our future, but it's for the future of our children and all those people coming after us. And if we don't do it, they may not have the kind of future that we plan for them. And with that, I'll take a couple of questions if anybody has.
Well, I got to tell you, Dr. Carson, it is such a joy, honor, and pleasure to have you on. Not only are you so insightful and so inspirational, you're also absolutely hysterical. And so I think I may have a few smudges from laughing to tears. So thank you so much. Your beautiful bride is going to kill me if I don't get you home. So why don't I go ahead and let you go on back to her? Will you give Candy big hugs for me? And wish her a Merry Christmas. But
all right.
Truly, thank you so very much for joining us tonight.
All right. Well, thank you all for being patriots.